The call came at 6:47 in the morning, 3 days after we buried my mother. I was still in that fog of grief where everything feels muffled and distant, where simple tasks like making coffee require conscious thought. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I answered without checking the caller ID, assuming it was one of my siblings calling to discuss funeral expenses or thank you notes. Ms. Brennan, this is Richard Westfield. I need you to come to my office this morning. There's been a development with your mother's estate that requires immediate attention. Richard Westfield had been our family attorney for 32 years. He'd handled my parents' wills, their real estate transactions, business contracts for my father's manufacturing company, even my own divorce 5 years ago. He was more than a lawyer. He was practically family, someone who attended our holiday dinners and knew intimate details about our lives. My mother had trusted him completely. What kind of development? I asked, sitting up in bed, the grief fog starting to clear. I'd prefer to discuss it in person. Can you be here at 9? Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. Richard, just tell me what's going on. Your mother made some changes to her will shortly before she died, changes that affect your inheritance significantly. We need to discuss the implications. My mother had died of a stroke at 73. It had been sudden but not entirely unexpected given her high blood pressure and stress from managing my late father's business affairs. She'd been coherent and active right up until the end, handling correspondence and meetings from her hospital bed during the week before she passed. What kind of changes? I asked. As I said, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. 9 o'clock, Ms. Brennan, don't be late. He hung up before I could respond. I sat holding the phone, my mind racing through possibilities. My mother and I had been close. She'd relied on me heavily after my father died 8 years ago, particularly with business decisions. My two brothers, Marcus and Stephen, were both successful in their own careers, but neither had interest in the family manufacturing company. I'd been the one to step in, learning the business, working alongside my mother to keep it profitable. The idea that she'd made changes to her will that would negatively affect me made no sense. I arrived at Westfield's office at 8:55, dressed in the black suit I'd worn to the funeral. His receptionist, a woman named Paula who'd worked for him for 20 years, looked at me with something I couldn't quite identify. Pity? Discomfort? She directed me to the conference room where Richard was waiting. Richard Westfield was 68, distinguished in that way successful lawyers cultivate: silver hair, expensive suit, confident posture. He stood when I entered, extending his hand with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Claire, thank you for coming on such short notice. Please sit down. I sat. He remained standing, pulling a folder from his briefcase and laying it on the conference table between us. Your mother executed a codicil to her will 2 weeks before she died. I have it here, properly witnessed and notarized. He slid papers across the table. I picked them up, scanning the legal language, trying to make sense of what I was reading. The original will had divided my mother's estate equally between me and my brothers. The house, her personal accounts, and most importantly, controlling interest in Brennan Manufacturing. The company my grandfather had founded, my father had grown, and my mother had maintained. The company I'd been effectively running for the past 3 years. This codicil changed everything. It left the house and personal accounts divided 3 ways as before. But Brennan Manufacturing was now left entirely to something called the Brennan Family Trust, with Richard Westfield named as sole trustee with complete control over all business decisions. This makes no sense, I said, reading it again. Mom was planning to transfer controlling interest to me. We discussed it a month before she died. She said she'd have you draw up the paperwork. Plans change, Richard said smoothly. Your mother became concerned about your ability to handle the responsibility. She felt the company would be better served by professional management through a trust structure. She never said anything like that to me. She wouldn't have. She didn't want to hurt your feelings. But she confided in me that she'd been noticing some concerning decisions you'd been making. Vendor contracts that weren't advantageous, hiring choices that worried her. She felt you meant well but lacked the experience to run a company of this size. Every word was like a slap. That's not true. I've been running that company successfully for 3 years. Profits are up 18%. We've expanded into 2 new markets. Mom knew that. She was proud of what I'd accomplished. Richard's expression was patient, the way you look at a child who doesn't understand something obvious. Claire, I know this is difficult. Your mother loved you, but love doesn't always translate to confidence in business acumen. She wanted to protect the company your grandfather built, and she felt this was the best way to do it. By putting you in control, you're not in the manufacturing business. You don't know anything about running a company like ours. As trustee, I'll hire professional management. The trust is structured to ensure the company remains profitable and provides income for you and your brothers. You'll receive quarterly distributions based on company performance. I don't want distributions. I want what my mother promised me, control of the company I've been running. What your mother promised verbally is not what she committed to legally, Richard said, his voice taking on an edge. This codicil is valid, properly executed, and filed with the court. The estate is in probate as of yesterday. The trust takes effect immediately. I stared at him, trying to process what was happening. My mother's estate, her company, her legacy, was being placed entirely in Richard Westfield's hands, and I was being reduced to a passive beneficiary, receiving whatever he decided to give me. I want to see the original, I said. I want to see my mother's signature, the witnesses, everything. Of course. He pulled additional pages from the folder. Here's the original codicil, signed by your mother in the presence of two witnesses from my office, and here's the notarization. I examined the documents. My mother's signature looked right. The notary seal appeared legitimate. The witnesses were listed as Paula Hendricks and James Chen, both employees of Westfield's firm. I want to speak with the witnesses, I said. That's your right, though I don't see what good it will do. They'll confirm what I've told you. Your mother came to my office of her own volition and signed this document after I explained its implications. Something was wrong. I couldn't articulate what, but every instinct I had was screaming that this wasn't right. My mother wouldn't have done this. She wouldn't have put Richard in control of everything without even discussing it with me. I want copies of everything, I said. The original will, the codicil, all supporting documents. I'll have Paula make copies for you. Claire, I understand you're upset. This isn't the inheritance you expected. But your mother made her decision, and as her attorney and the executor of her estate, I'm bound to honor it. You're also the beneficiary of that decision, I pointed out. You're now controlling a company worth approximately $40 million. That's a significant conflict of interest. His expression hardened. I'm serving as trustee at your mother's request. I'm not taking a salary beyond the standard trustee fees, which are entirely legal and appropriate. If you have concerns about the validity of the codicil, you're welcome to hire your own attorney and challenge it in court. But I should warn you that such challenges are expensive, time-consuming, and rarely successful when the documentation is as solid as this. He stood, signaling the meeting was over. I'll have those copies ready for you by this afternoon. In the meantime, I've already begun the process of transitioning company management. I'll be meeting with key employees this week to introduce myself and discuss the new structure. I left his office feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and called my brother Marcus. Did you know about this? I asked when he answered. About the codicil, about Richard taking control of the company? What are you talking about? I explained what Richard had told me. Marcus was silent for a long moment. That doesn't sound like Mom, he finally said. She was so proud of what you'd done with the company. Why would she suddenly decide to cut you out? She didn't cut me out entirely. I still get a third of the other assets, but the company is now in Richard's hands. What does Stephen say? I haven't talked to him yet. I wanted to call you first. Call him, and Claire, if something feels wrong about this, trust your instincts. Mom always said you had the best business sense in the family. I called Stephen next. He was more skeptical than Marcus. Maybe she did have concerns, he said. You've been under a lot of stress. Maybe she noticed things you didn't realize you were showing. You think I was screwing up the company? I think grief and exhaustion can affect judgment. Maybe Mom noticed that and wanted to protect the business. By putting a lawyer in charge, a lawyer with no manufacturing experience, he's not running it himself, he's hiring professionals. That might actually be smarter than leaving it to any of us. I hung up feeling isolated. My brothers weren't going to help. Marcus was sympathetic but passive. Stephen was already accepting Richard's narrative that I wasn't capable of running the company. That afternoon, I picked up the copies from Richard's office. Paula handed them to me without making eye contact. I thanked her and left, driving directly to a coffee shop where I spread everything out on a table and read through every page. The codicil was dated 2 weeks before my mother's stroke. It was short, just 3 pages, clearly stating that all shares of Brennan Manufacturing were to be placed in the Brennan Family Trust with Richard Westfield as sole trustee. The language was precise and unambiguous. The signatures looked right. The notarization appeared legitimate. Everything seemed legally proper, but something nagged at me. The language of the codicil was different from the language in the original will. My mother's will had been comprehensive, detailed, full of specific instructions about who got what personal items, how her accounts should be distributed, provisions for her grandchildren. It was clearly her voice, her concerns, her values. This codicil was stripped down, mechanical, focused solely on the business transfer. It didn't sound like something my mother would have written or even directed Richard to write. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew who could help me, Tom Bradshaw, a private investigator I'd used during my divorce. Tom had found evidence of my ex-husband's hidden accounts and affairs, helping me secure a favorable settlement. He was discreet, thorough, and expensive. Tom, I need your help. I think my family's attorney is stealing my inheritance. We met that evening at his office in a converted warehouse downtown. I laid out everything: my mother's death, the unexpected codicil, Richard's sudden control of a $40 million company, my instincts that something was wrong. Tom listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Let me ask you some questions. When your mother signed this codicil, was she in the hospital? She must have been. She was admitted 10 days before she died. The codicil is dated 2 weeks before her death, so she would have still been home, but she was having health issues. That's why she ended up in the hospital. So she went to Westfield's office to sign this? I guess so. I wasn't with her that day. Did she drive herself? I paused. She'd stopped driving a few months earlier. Her vision was getting bad. I usually drove her places or she'd use a car service. So someone would have had to take her to Westfield's office. Who would that have been? I don't know. Maybe she asked a friend. Or maybe Westfield came to her house, Tom suggested. That's what I'd do if I was trying to get an elderly client to sign something. Go to them, make it convenient, reduce the number of witnesses to the circumstances. But the codicil was notarized at his office. It says so right here. Says so, yes. Let's verify that. Tom opened his laptop and started typing. What's the notary's name? Sandra Kellerman. Tom searched for several minutes. Sandra Kellerman is a registered notary in this state, but look at this. He turned his laptop toward me. Her business address is listed as 447 Commerce Street. That's not Westfield's office address. Maybe she works independently. Maybe. Or maybe she's someone Westfield knows who is willing to notarize something without actually witnessing the signing. Tom made more notes. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to interview the witnesses listed on this codicil, Paula Hendricks and James Chen. I'm going to verify with the notary that she actually witnessed your mother signing. I'm going to pull records on the Brennan Family Trust to see when it was established and who else is involved. And I'm going to look into Westfield's financials to see if there's any indication of financial pressure or suspicious transactions. How long will that take? A few weeks, maybe a month. This kind of investigation requires patience. I don't have a month. Richard is already taking control of the company. He's meeting with key employees, making decisions, positioning himself as the new boss. Then we work fast, Tom said. But Claire, I need to warn you. If Westfield did fabricate this codicil, he's not going to just admit it when confronted. He's a lawyer, he knows how to cover his tracks. We need ironclad proof, and that takes time to gather. Get started, I said. Whatever it costs, I'll pay. Over the next 3 weeks, Tom worked systematically through every aspect of Richard Westfield's life and the circumstances of my mother's codicil. He interviewed Paula and James, both of whom confirmed they'd witnessed my mother sign the document in Richard's office. He verified the notarization with Sandra Kellerman, who showed him her records indicating she'd notarized my mother's signature on the date in question. Everything checked out. Everyone's story aligned. There was no obvious evidence of fraud or forgery, but Tom kept digging. He pulled property records, business filings, court documents, anything that might reveal a pattern. And slowly, a picture began to emerge. The Brennan Family Trust had been established 5 months before my mother died. That in itself wasn't suspicious. My mother had talked about creating a trust structure for estate planning purposes, but the timing was interesting. The trust had been funded with a nominal amount of cash, just enough to make it a legal entity, but nothing of real value had been transferred into it until the codicil. Tom traced the trust's registration and found something curious. The trust documents listed a business address that wasn't Richard's law office. It was a virtual office space, the kind businesses use when they want an address without actually having a physical presence. And that virtual office was also the registered address for three shell companies: Clearwater Holdings, Summit Ventures, and Riverside Management. Look at this, Tom said, showing me documents on his screen. These three companies are all registered to the same virtual address as your mother's trust. And they're all listed as Delaware corporations, which means their ownership is concealed. But here's the interesting part: all three companies are involved in real estate transactions. They've bought and sold properties over the past 3 years, and some of those transactions involved property that belonged to your family. I leaned closer to the screen. What do you mean, property that belonged to my family? Your parents owned a commercial building downtown, right? The one they rented out to small businesses. The Franklin Street property. My father bought it in the 90s as an investment. That property was sold 18 months ago to Clearwater Holdings for $1.2 million. Do you remember your mother selling it? No. She would have told me if she was selling a major asset like that. According to the records, the sale was handled by Richard Westfield on your mother's behalf. The purchase price was below market value. Similar properties in that area sell for closer to $1.8 million, and here's where it gets interesting. Tom pulled up more documents. 6 months after Clearwater bought it, they sold it to a development company for $2.1 million. Someone made a $900,000 profit on your family's property. I felt cold. Richard stole from my mother? Not directly. The property was sold legally, with your mother's signature on the documents, but it was sold at a substantial discount to a company that then flipped it for a huge profit. And that company, Clearwater Holdings, is a shell corporation that I can't trace to a specific owner. Can we prove Richard owns Clearwater? Not yet. Delaware corporations protect ownership information, but I'm working on it. Tom pulled up more records. There's also this: your mother took out a loan against Brennan Manufacturing 8 months ago, a $2 million line of credit that was paid back in full 3 months later. Do you know anything about that? No, the company didn't need a loan. We were profitable. Our cash flow was strong. According to the bank records I was able to access, the loan was approved based on an application submitted by Richard Westfield as the company's attorney. The money was transferred into a business account, held for 60 days, then paid back with interest. Why would we borrow money we didn't need and then pay it back? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But here's my theory. Someone needed $2 million for a short-term investment. They used your company's credit to get it, knowing they could pay it back before anyone noticed. And the timing coincides with several property transactions involving those shell companies. I sat back, my mind racing. Richard's been stealing from us, from my mother, from the company, probably for years, and this codicil is just the final move in whatever scheme he's running. That's my working theory, Tom said, but proving it is going to be difficult. Everything I've found so far is circumstantial. Property sales at below market prices, loans that don't make business sense, shell companies that might be connected to Westfield but can't be definitively traced to him. We need something concrete. Like what? Like testimony from someone who knows about the scheme, like documents showing direct communication between Westfield and these shell companies, like financial records proving money flowed from your family's assets into Westfield's accounts. Tom closed his laptop. I'm going to keep investigating. But Claire, you should consider filing a formal challenge to the codicil. Even without proof of fraud, you can argue that your mother lacked capacity when she signed it, or that Westfield exerted undue influence. Make him defend this thing in court while we're gathering evidence. That's expensive, and it tips him off that we're investigating. He probably already knows. You hired me 3 weeks ago. If he's as careful as he seems to be, he's been monitoring for exactly this kind of response. I left Tom's office feeling both vindicated and frustrated. My instincts had been right. Richard was dirty, but proving it was going to be harder than I'd anticipated. The next morning, I hired an attorney specializing in estate litigation. Her name was Jennifer Park, and she came highly recommended by Tom. Jennifer was in her early 50s, sharp and aggressive in a way that made me feel like I'd chosen the right person. This is a strong case for undue influence, Jennifer said, after reviewing the documents. Westfield had a confidential relationship with your mother. He drafted documents that directly benefit him. He's now controlling a significant asset that was supposed to go to you. Any reasonable court would see the conflict of interest. What about fraud? Tom's investigation is turning up evidence that Richard's been stealing from my family for years. Fraud is harder to prove, especially against a lawyer who knows how to cover his tracks. But if Tom can get concrete evidence, we can add those claims to our petition. Jennifer made notes on a legal pad. Here's what I recommend. We file a petition with the probate court challenging the codicil on grounds of undue influence and lack of capacity. We request a full accounting of your mother's assets and all transactions handled by Westfield in the 5 years before her death. We ask the court to remove him as trustee pending resolution of these issues. And we request access to all communications between Westfield and your mother during the final 6 months of her life. Will the court grant all that? Some of it, certainly, enough to make Westfield very uncomfortable. And once we start pulling his records, other things might come to light. Do it, I said. Jennifer filed the petition the next day. 24 hours later, I received a call from Richard Westfield. Claire, what the hell are you doing? His voice was tight with anger. You filed a lawsuit challenging your mother's will? I filed a challenge to a suspicious codicil that puts you in control of my family's company. There's a difference. This is insulting and baseless. Your mother made her wishes clear. You're wasting court time and money because you're angry you didn't get what you wanted. I'm angry because nothing about this makes sense. My mother wouldn't have done this without talking to me, and the more I look into your handling of her affairs, the more questions I have. There was a pause. When Richard spoke again, his voice was cold. If you're implying I've done something improper, you're making a serious accusation. I've served your family faithfully for 3 decades. I've handled every legal matter with complete integrity. If you want to challenge this codicil, fine. But when you lose, and you will lose, I'll expect a public apology. We'll see about that, I said and hung up. The court set a hearing date for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Tom continued his investigation. He'd hired a forensic accountant to analyze my mother's financial records and a handwriting expert to examine her signature on the codicil. The handwriting analysis came back inconclusive. The signature appeared to be my mother's, but the expert noted some irregularities that could indicate she'd been signing while impaired or under stress. Not enough to prove forgery, but enough to raise questions. The forensic accountant's report was more damning. He identified 12 transactions over the past 5 years where my family's assets had been sold or leveraged at terms that didn't make financial sense. The Franklin Street property was just one example. There were others: stocks sold at losses when the market was strong, loans taken out and repaid quickly for no apparent business reason, rental properties sold to buyers who then flipped them for substantial profits. Someone with access to your mother's finances was systematically extracting value, the accountant told me. Not in obvious ways that would trigger immediate red flags, but gradually, through transactions that looked legitimate on the surface but were structured to benefit someone other than your family. How much are we talking about? Conservatively, between $5 and $7 million over 5 years. That's money that should have been in your mother's estate but isn't. I felt sick. Richard Westfield had been stealing from my family for years, and we'd trusted him completely. We'd invited him to our home, shared our lives with him, relied on his advice. And he'd been robbing us blind. Can we prove he's behind this? I asked. Not definitively. The transactions were all handled legally, with proper documentation and your mother's signature. But the pattern is clear. Someone knew exactly how to extract maximum value while maintaining legal cover. Tom scheduled another meeting. I've got something, he said when I arrived. One of the shell companies, Summit Ventures, made a mistake. They registered a trademark for a development project using a business address that's different from their virtual office. I traced that address to a residential property in Connecticut. Want to guess who owns that property? Richard Westfield. Close. It's owned by Catherine Westfield, his wife. And here's the interesting part. Catherine Westfield is listed as an officer of Summit Ventures in a filing they made with the Connecticut Secretary of State. She's not listed on the Delaware filings, but Connecticut requires more disclosure for companies doing business in the state. So we can connect Richard to at least one of these shell companies. We can connect his wife to one of them. Which isn't quite the same thing, but it's a start. I'm pulling all the financial records I can find on Catherine Westfield now. Bank accounts, credit cards, property transfers, anything that might show money flowing from your family's assets to her accounts. How long will that take? I'm working as fast as I can. But Claire, these people are sophisticated. They've been careful. Even if I find the money trail, Westfield's going to claim it was all legitimate transactions, properly disclosed, with your mother's full knowledge and consent. Then we need someone to contradict that. Someone who knows what really happened. Like who? Like Paula or James, the witnesses to the codicil. If they were pressured into lying, if they know something was wrong, maybe one of them will talk. Tom shook his head. I already interviewed them. They're sticking to their story. Then we need to give them a reason to change that story. We need them to understand that Richard's going down, and they can either go down with him or save themselves by telling the truth. Jennifer filed a motion requesting depositions of Paula Hendricks and James Chen. The court granted the motion, setting dates for both depositions within 3 weeks. Jennifer also requested production of all of Richard's files related to my mother's estate, his communications with her, and any documents related to the Brennan family trust. Richard fought every request, filing motions to quash the depositions and limit the scope of discovery. But the judge was skeptical of his arguments. In a preliminary hearing, the judge noted that Richard's dual role as both attorney and trustee created inherent conflicts that warranted scrutiny. Mr. Westfield, the judge said, you drafted a will that places you in control of a substantial asset. That alone raises questions about undue influence. I'm going to allow broad discovery so we can determine whether Mrs. Brennan's intentions were honored or whether you took advantage of your position of trust. Richard's face was stone as he left the courtroom. He didn't look at me or Jennifer. He simply gathered his papers and walked out, his assistant scurrying behind him. He's worried, Jennifer said as we left the courthouse. That judge just signaled she's taking your claims seriously. Westfield knows he's going to have to defend every transaction, every decision, every piece of advice he gave your mother. And if there's anything irregular, it's going to come out. Good, I said. Let him worry. Let him lie awake at night wondering what we're going to find. 2 days before Paula's scheduled deposition, Tom called me. You need to see this, he said. Can you come to my office right now? I drove there immediately. Tom had his laptop open, multiple windows displayed on his screen. I got into Catherine Westfield's email, he said. Don't ask me how, but look at this exchange between her and Richard from 6 months ago. He showed me an email chain. Catherine had written, Did you finalize the Brennan transfer? We need that money by the 15th to close on the Berkshires property. Richard's response, working on it, the old woman is getting suspicious. I may need to move up the timeline. Catherine, can't you just have her sign the paperwork? You've done it before. Richard, this is different. The daughter's been asking questions. I need to be careful. I read the emails twice, my hands shaking. This is it. This is proof he was planning to steal from my mother. We can use this. We can, Tom said, but I obtained it illegally. It won't be admissible in court. However, we can use it to guide our investigation. We know what to look for now. What's the Berkshires property? Tom pulled up more records. Richard and Catherine purchased a vacation home in the Berkshires 6 months ago for $3.2 million. Cash purchase, no mortgage. Want to guess where that money came from? My mother's assets. Can't prove it yet, but the timing is interesting. They bought the property right after several transactions involving your family's assets. The Franklin Street sale, the loan against Brennan Manufacturing, the sale of your mother's investment portfolio at below market prices. Money went out of your mother's accounts, and a few months later, the Westfields bought a multi-million-dollar vacation home in cash. I felt rage building, hot and sharp. He stole from my dying mother to buy a vacation house. What kind of person does that? The kind who's about to be exposed, Tom said. We use this information to pressure Paula and James. We show them we know what Westfield did. We give them a chance to save themselves by telling the truth about what really happened when that codicil was signed. Paula's deposition was scheduled for Monday morning. Jennifer and I arrived at her lawyer's office at 9 a.m. Paula was there with her attorney, looking nervous. She was 58, had worked for Richard for 2 decades, and knew where every body was buried in his practice. Jennifer started with basic background questions, establishing Paula's role in Richard's firm and her relationship with my mother. Then she got to the critical question. Ms. Hendricks, you witnessed Evelyn Brennan signing a codicil to her will on March 15th of this year. Is that correct? Yes. Can you describe the circumstances of that signing? Paula hesitated, glancing at her lawyer. Mrs. Brennan came to the office. Mr. Westfield explained the document to her. She signed it. James and I witnessed her signature. What time did Mrs. Brennan arrive at the office? I don't remember exactly. Morning, I think. Did she come alone? I don't know, I didn't see her arrive. How did she seem? Alert, confused, ill? She seemed fine, normal. Did she ask any questions about the document? Not that I heard. Jennifer pulled out a document. This is the sign-in log from your office building's security desk. It shows everyone who entered the building that day. Mrs. Brennan's name isn't on it. Can you explain that? Paula shifted in her seat. Maybe she came in through the parking garage. That entrance doesn't require sign-in. But your office is on the 17th floor. The parking garage elevator only goes to the 10th floor. She would have had to transfer to a different elevator bank and go through the main lobby, where she would have had to sign in. I don't know, maybe the security guard forgot to have her sign. Or maybe she was never there, Jennifer said. Maybe Mr. Westfield brought the document to her house and had her sign it there, and then brought it back to the office and had you witness a signature you didn't actually see her make. That's not what happened, Paula said, but her voice lacked conviction. Jennifer laid out more documents. Phone records showing Richard had called my mother's home number that morning, GPS data from his car showing he'd driven to her neighborhood, credit card receipts from a coffee shop near my mother's house. A picture was emerging of Richard visiting my mother at home, not her coming to his office. Ms. Hendricks, I'm going to ask you again. Did you actually see Evelyn Brennan sign that codicil with your own eyes? Paula looked at her lawyer, who whispered something to her. Then she looked back at Jennifer. I want to revise my earlier testimony, Paula said quietly. I may have been mistaken about the circumstances. Paula's lawyer immediately called for a break. Jennifer and I stepped out into the hallway while they conferred. Through the conference room window, I could see Paula with her head in her hands while her attorney spoke urgently to her. She's cracking, Jennifer said. She knows we have evidence that contradicts her story, and she's smart enough to understand that lying under oath is a crime. What happens if she changes her testimony? Then we have a witness saying Richard Westfield fabricated evidence. That's enough to invalidate the codicil and potentially file criminal charges against him for fraud and forgery. After 15 minutes, Paula's lawyer called us back in. Paula looked pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. My client would like to clarify her previous statements, her lawyer said carefully. She was attempting to recall events from several months ago and may have been confused about certain details. Jennifer nodded. I appreciate your client's willingness to correct the record. Ms. Hendricks, let's start again. Did you personally witness Evelyn Brennan signing the codicil to her will? Paula took a breath. No, I didn't see Mrs. Brennan in the office that day. Mr. Westfield came back from lunch with the document and asked James and me to witness it. He said Mrs. Brennan had already signed it but needed witnesses. Did you ask why Mrs. Brennan hadn't signed it in front of witnesses, as is standard practice? I did. He said she'd been feeling unwell and he'd gone to her house to have her sign it, and that it was perfectly legal for us to witness her signature after the fact as long as we saw the document. And you believed him? He's a lawyer. He's my boss. I trusted that he knew what he was doing. Jennifer made notes. Did Mr. Westfield explain what the codicil contained? He said it was an amendment to Mrs. Brennan's will regarding her business assets. He didn't give me details. Has Mr. Westfield ever asked you to witness documents in this manner before, where you didn't actually see the client sign? Paula hesitated. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered to her again. Paula nodded and turned back to Jennifer. Yes, a few times over the years. Always, for what he said, were unusual circumstances where the client couldn't come to the office. Can you give me specific examples? There was an elderly man named Harrison Wells, about 3 years ago. Mr. Westfield said he'd gone to Mr. Wells's nursing home to have him sign a new will. Then there was Margaret Foster, maybe 5 years ago. Same situation. Mr. Westfield brought back signed documents and had us witness them after the fact. Jennifer leaned forward. Did you know that both Harrison Wells and Margaret Foster left substantial assets to trusts controlled by Mr. Westfield? Paula's eyes widened. No, I didn't know that. Did you know that both of their families contested those wills? claiming Mr. Westfield had unduly influenced their elderly relatives. I heard something about the Wells case, but it was settled out of court. I assumed the family's claims were unfounded. Or Mr. Westfield paid them off to avoid scrutiny, Jennifer said. Ms. Hendricks, I want you to understand something. You've just testified under oath that you witnessed documents without actually seeing clients sign them. That could be construed as fraud. You could face criminal charges and lose your notary license. But if you cooperate fully with this investigation, if you provide us with information about all the times Mr. Westfield engaged in this practice, I can speak to the district attorney about immunity for your testimony. Paula looked at her lawyer, who nodded slowly. What do you want to know? Paula asked quietly. Over the next 2 hours, Paula detailed a pattern of conduct that went back years. Richard Westfield had been systematically targeting elderly clients, particularly those without close family oversight. He'd convinced them to create trusts with him as trustee, amend their wills to benefit entities he controlled, and take out loans or sell assets at below market prices to buyers who turned out to be connected to his shell companies. He was always very careful, Paula said. Everything was documented. There were always signatures, witnesses, notarizations. On the surface, everything looked legal. But there were patterns. Clients who came in regularly for years would suddenly stop coming in. Mr. Westfield would visit them at home instead. And then we'd get documents to file that changed their estates significantly. Did you ever question this? Jennifer asked. Once, about 3 years ago after the Wells case. I asked Mr. Westfield if we should be documenting these home visits more carefully, maybe having a second attorney present or video recording the signings. He told me I was being paranoid and that his practice methods were perfectly ethical. He also reminded me that I had a very good salary and benefits and that I should think carefully before creating problems. He threatened you? Not explicitly, but the message was clear. What about James Chen? Did he have concerns? James did what he was told. He's younger, been with the firm less time. He wanted to make partner. He wasn't going to question Mr. Westfield. Jennifer showed Paula the emails Tom had discovered between Richard and his wife. Have you seen communications like this before? References to needing money by specific dates, mentions of client assets? Paula studied the emails. I haven't seen these specific ones. Mr. Westfield kept his personal email separate from the office system, but I've heard phone conversations. He'd call his wife from the office sometimes and talk about deals closing, money coming through. I never connected it to client assets until now. Will you testify to all of this in court? Jennifer asked. Paula looked at her lawyer again. He nodded. Yes, she said. If you can guarantee immunity from prosecution, I'll testify. I should have spoken up years ago. I knew something was wrong, but I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that I was just doing my job. I was wrong. James Chen's deposition, scheduled for the following week, was almost anticlimactic. Once we showed him Paula's testimony and the evidence we'd gathered, he immediately admitted he'd never actually witnessed my mother sign anything. Richard had brought documents back from a supposed home visit and had James witness after the fact, just as he'd done with Paula. I'm 29 years old, James said, looking miserable. This was my first job out of law school. Mr. Westfield was supposed to be mentoring me. I trusted him. I thought this was normal practice. Didn't you learn about proper will execution in law school? Jennifer asked. Yes, but Mr. Westfield said there were exceptions for unusual circumstances, that as long as the testator had actually signed, and we were witnessing the signature, not the signing itself, it was acceptable. I was naive. I believed him. With testimony from both witnesses admitting they'd never actually seen my mother sign the codicil, Jennifer filed an emergency motion to invalidate it and remove Richard as trustee. The hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. In the meantime, Tom's investigation had uncovered more evidence. The forensic accountant had traced money from the sale of my mother's Franklin Street property through a series of transfers that ultimately ended up in accounts belonging to shell companies controlled by Catherine Westfield. Similar patterns existed for other transactions. Money left my family's accounts, passed through intermediary businesses, and eventually landed in accounts Richard and his wife controlled. The total is up to $8 million now, Tom told me. $8 million your family lost through transactions that benefited Westfield. And that's just what we can prove. There's probably more we haven't found yet. Is it enough to press criminal charges? More than enough. I've been coordinating with the district attorney's office. They're very interested in this case. They've actually been looking at Westfield for years, but never had enough evidence to move forward. Your case might be what they need to finally take him down. The emergency hearing was held on a Thursday morning. The courtroom was packed with people who'd heard about the case. Other attorneys, former clients of Richard's, reporters who sensed a major scandal developing. Richard sat at the defense table with his attorneys, three lawyers from a prestigious firm he'd hired to defend him. He looked older than he had a month ago, the stress showing in his face. When I entered, he didn't meet my eyes. Jennifer presented our evidence systematically. She called Paula to the stand first. Paula testified about the pattern of having clients sign documents outside the office and then witnessing those signatures after the fact. She testified about Richard's threats when she'd raised concerns. She testified about overhearing conversations between Richard and his wife about money from clients. Richard's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggesting she was lying to save her own career, that she was disgruntled about something and making up accusations. But Paula stood firm. She'd brought her own documentation, calendars showing when clients were supposedly in the office versus when Richard's car GPS showed him at their homes, copies of internal memos where she'd expressed concerns about documentation practices. James Chen testified next, corroborating Paula's account. He added details about Richard instructing him on how to notarize documents, including having him backdate notarizations to match dates when clients had supposedly been in the office but actually hadn't. Mr. Westfield told me this was standard practice for busy clients who couldn't always come in during business hours, James said. He told me I was providing a service by being flexible. I didn't understand I was participating in fraud. Jennifer then presented the financial evidence. The forensic accountant walked through transaction after transaction, showing how my family's assets had been systematically sold or transferred at below market rates to entities that were ultimately controlled by Richard or his wife. He displayed charts showing the money trail, highlighted the timing of transactions, demonstrated the pattern. In my professional opinion, the accountant concluded, someone with intimate knowledge of the Brennan family's finances orchestrated a sophisticated scheme to transfer wealth from the family to entities controlled by Richard Westfield. The transactions were structured to appear legitimate, but the cumulative effect was to defraud the family of approximately $8 million over 5 years. Richard's lawyers argued that every transaction had been properly authorized, that my mother had been aware of and agreed to all of them, that there was no evidence of coercion or fraud. They presented documents with my mother's signature, notarizations, witness statements. But Jennifer countered with the testimony of Paula and James, proving that at least some of those signatures had been witnessed improperly. She presented expert testimony from the handwriting analyst showing irregularities in my mother's signatures on critical documents, suggesting possible forgery or signing under duress. She showed the judge emails between Richard and his wife discussing needing money from the Brennan transfer. The judge listened to 3 full days of testimony before ruling. On the 4th day, we reconvened to hear her decision. I've reviewed all the evidence presented, Judge Martinez began. I've considered the testimony of witnesses, the expert opinions, and the documentary evidence. This court finds clear and convincing evidence that Richard Westfield engaged in a pattern of unethical conduct with regard to Evelyn Brennan's estate. Richard closed his eyes. His lawyers remained expressionless. The codicil dated March 15th is hereby invalidated, the judge continued. The testimony of Ms. Hendricks and Mr. Chen establishes that Mrs. Brennan did not sign this document in the presence of proper witnesses as required by law. Furthermore, the financial evidence presented suggests Mr. Westfield had a significant conflict of interest in drafting a document that gave him control over substantial assets. She looked directly at Richard. Mr. Westfield, you were in a position of trust with this family. You were their attorney for over 3 decades. They relied on you to protect their interests, and instead, you appear to have used your position to enrich yourself at their expense. This court is referring your conduct to the state bar for disciplinary proceedings and to the district attorney for potential criminal prosecution. Your Honor, we intend to appeal, one of Richard's lawyers said, standing. That's your right, Judge Martinez said. But in the meantime, Mr. Westfield is removed as trustee of the Brennan Family Trust, which is hereby dissolved. The estate will be distributed according to Mrs. Brennan's original will. Ms. Brennan, she looked at me, you are appointed temporary administrator of your mother's estate and given control of Brennan, manufacturing pending final resolution of all claims. She banged her gavel. This hearing is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in noise. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Richard's lawyers immediately huddled with him, discussing next steps. Jennifer turned to me with a broad smile. We won, she said simply, but it wasn't over. The judge's ruling invalidated the codicil and gave me back control of the company, but the criminal case was just beginning. The district attorney, a woman named Sarah Chen, had been building a case against Richard throughout our civil proceedings. She'd been coordinating with Tom and the forensic accountant, gathering evidence for fraud, forgery, and theft charges. 2 weeks after the judge's ruling, Richard Westfield was arrested at his home. The charges were extensive: multiple counts of fraud, forgery, theft by deception, abuse of a fiduciary duty. The indictment detailed his scheme to defraud not just my family, but at least 6 other families over a 10-year period. Westfield targeted elderly clients with substantial assets and limited family oversight, Sarah Chen announced at a press conference. He used his position as their trusted attorney to manipulate their estates, transferring wealth to entities he controlled. We estimate total losses to victims at approximately $23 million. The news coverage was extensive. Local media picked up the story immediately, and national outlets followed. Trusted attorney accused of elaborate fraud scheme? Read one headline. Lawyer allegedly stole millions from elderly clients, said another. Other victims began coming forward. A man whose father had been one of Richard's clients contacted Jennifer, saying his father had amended his will shortly before dying to leave everything to a trust Richard controlled. A woman whose elderly aunt had mysteriously sold her home below market value and died penniless a year later called the district attorney's office. Each new victim added to the evidence of Richard's systematic fraud. The state bar moved quickly to suspend Richard's license. A disciplinary hearing was scheduled, but the outcome was never in doubt. Richard Westfield would never practice law again. His wife Catherine was also arrested, charged as an accessory to fraud and money laundering. Prosecutors alleged she'd been complicit in the scheme, helping Richard hide stolen assets in shell companies and spending money she knew came from fraud. Tom's investigation had been exhaustive. He'd traced the Delaware shell companies back to bank accounts Catherine controlled. He'd found emails between her and Richard discussing specific victims and how much money they could extract. He'd documented her spending: the vacation home in the Berkshires, luxury cars, expensive jewelry, all purchased with money stolen from Richard's elderly clients. She wasn't a passive beneficiary, Sarah Chen said. She was an active participant in the scheme. She helped her husband identify targets, launder money, and conceal assets. She'll face significant prison time if convicted. Richard's trial was scheduled for 8 months after his arrest. In the meantime, Jennifer filed civil suits on behalf of my family and several other victims, seeking to recover stolen assets. We sued Richard, Catherine, and the shell companies, requesting emergency freezes on their accounts and assets. The court granted our motions. Richard and Catherine's bank accounts were frozen. The Berkshires' vacation home was seized. Their cars were impounded. Everything they'd bought with stolen money was identified and earmarked for eventual return to victims. I focused on rebuilding. Brennan Manufacturing had suffered during the months Richard controlled it. He'd been negotiating a sale of the company to a private equity firm that would have stripped its assets and laid off most employees. I canceled those negotiations and instead met with department heads, key employees, and our major clients to reassure them the company was stable and committed to its mission. My mother built this company alongside my father, I told the assembled staff at a company-wide meeting. She trusted me to continue that work, to honor their legacy by treating employees fairly and delivering quality products. That's what we're going to do. No private equity takeover. No asset stripping. Just honest business focused on sustainable growth. The relief in the room was palpable. People had been terrified they'd lose their jobs, that Richard would sell the company to the highest bidder who cared nothing about the employees or the community. Now they understood they had security, that someone who cared about them was in charge. My brothers called to apologize. Marcus first, sounding genuinely remorseful. I should have supported you from the beginning, he said. When you said something was wrong, I should have believed you. Instead, I doubted your instincts and left you to fight alone. I'm sorry. You weren't wrong to question, I said. The evidence looked legitimate. Richard was careful to cover his tracks, but I appreciate you saying that. Stephen's apology was more reluctant. I guess you were right about Westfield, he said. I thought you were being paranoid, but he really was stealing from us. That's pretty messed up. Yes, it is, I agreed. But Stephen, this isn't just about being right, it's about our family's legacy. Mom and Dad built something meaningful, and Richard almost destroyed it. We can't let that happen again. We need to be better stewards of what they left us. I know. I'll try to be more involved going forward. It was a start. My brothers and I had never been particularly close, but this experience had shown us the importance of family solidarity. We'd been divided, and Richard had exploited that division. We couldn't let it happen again. Richard's trial began in February, 10 months after my mother's death. The prosecution's case was methodical and damning. They called victim after victim, each telling stories of how Richard had gained their trust, convinced them to restructure their estates, and then stolen from them. Paula and James testified about the document fraud. The forensic accountant detailed the money laundering. Tom explained his investigation and how he'd traced assets from victims to Richard's accounts. I testified about my mother's final months, her trust in Richard, and how he'd betrayed that trust. Richard's defense was that he'd acted in good faith, that any irregularities were honest mistakes, that he genuinely believed he was serving his client's best interests. His lawyers argued that my mother had been aware of all transactions, had approved them, and had wanted Richard to control her estate. But the evidence was overwhelming. Document after document showed Richard's pattern of fraud. Email after email showed him discussing clients as targets and planning how to extract money from them. Witness after witness described his manipulation and lies. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Richard showed no emotion as the verdicts were read. Catherine, tried separately, was also convicted on most charges. Sentencing came 3 months later. Richard received 22 years in federal prison. Catherine received 8 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution totaling over $20 million to their victims. Mr. Westfield, you were an officer of the court, the judge said at sentencing. You took an oath to uphold the law and serve your clients faithfully. Instead, you used your position to prey on vulnerable people who trusted you. You stole from families who had relied on you for decades. You betrayed every principle of your profession. Your sentence reflects the severity of your crimes and sends a message that such conduct will not be tolerated. Richard was led away in handcuffs. I watched him go, feeling not triumph but sadness. This man had been part of our lives for 30 years. He'd attended my father's funeral, helped me through my divorce, shared holidays with us. And the entire time, he'd been planning how to steal from us. The restitution process took another year. Assets were liquidated, accounts were divided among victims, and each family received a portion of what they'd lost. My family recovered approximately 5 million of the 8 million Richard had stolen from us. The remaining 3 million had been spent and couldn't be recovered. It's not everything, but it's something, Jennifer said when the final settlement was distributed. And more importantly, you stopped him from stealing from anyone else. Who knows how many other families he would have defrauded if you hadn't fought back. I used part of the recovered money to establish a foundation focused on elder financial protection. The Evelyn Brennan Foundation provides education to seniors about financial fraud, offers free legal review of estate documents, and funds investigations of suspected abuse by financial professionals. My mother trusted the wrong person, I said at the foundation's launch event. She was smart, capable, and experienced in business, but she didn't recognize that someone she'd known for decades was stealing from her. If it can happen to her, it can happen to anyone. This foundation is about preventing that. About teaching people to question, to verify, to demand transparency, even from people they trust. The foundation's work expanded quickly. We received dozens of calls from families concerned about their elderly relatives' financial professionals. We reviewed hundreds of estate documents and found irregularities in about 15% of them. Most were honest mistakes, but several appeared to be deliberate fraud. In each case, we referred families to appropriate authorities and helped them protect their assets. 3 years after my mother's death, I stood in the conference room at Brennan Manufacturing looking at quarterly results. The company had grown steadily under my leadership. We'd expanded into new markets, increased efficiency, and improved employee satisfaction. Profits were up 32% from when I'd taken over, and we'd been named one of the best places to work in our state. My mother would have been proud. She'd trusted me to carry on what she and my father had built, and I'd honored that trust. Richard Westfield had tried to steal that opportunity from me to take control of my family's legacy for his own enrichment. But I'd fought back, uncovered his crimes, and ensured he faced justice. Tom called that afternoon. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Richard's appealing his conviction. His lawyers are arguing he didn't get a fair trial, that evidence was obtained improperly. Will it go anywhere? Unlikely. The evidence against him was overwhelming and properly obtained, but he's trying everything he can to get out of prison. Let him try, I said. He's going to spend the next 2 decades behind bars regardless, and everyone knows what he did. His reputation is destroyed, his license is gone, his assets are seized. Even if he somehow got his conviction overturned, which won't happen, his life is over. Justice served, Tom said. Justice served, I agreed. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where my mother was buried. I hadn't visited in months, too busy with work and the foundation and rebuilding our family's life. But today I needed to be there, to sit beside her grave and tell her what had happened. We won, Mom, I said, sitting on the grass beside her headstone. Richard's in prison. The company is thriving, your legacy is protected. I'm sorry I didn't see what he was doing sooner. I'm sorry I let him get as far as he did. But I stopped him eventually. I made him pay. The wind rustled through the trees surrounding the cemetery. Birds sang in the distance. The world continued turning, indifferent to human drama and triumph. I miss you, I said. I miss your advice, your support, your belief in me, but I'm trying to be the person you raised me to be. Someone who fights for what's right, who doesn't back down from difficult battles, who protects family and honors commitments. I hope I'm making you proud. I sat there for a long time, remembering my mother, her strength, her wisdom, her absolute refusal to quit even when things were difficult. She'd survived losing her husband young, running a business in a male-dominated industry, raising 3 children while managing a company. She'd been formidable. Richard Westfield had underestimated her. He'd thought because she was elderly and ill that she'd be an easy target, that her children wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. He'd been wrong. He'd forgotten that my mother had raised me, had taught me to question, to investigate, to never accept things at face value. Those lessons had destroyed him. I stood up, brushed grass from my pants, and walked back to my car. Tomorrow I had meetings, decisions to make, a company to run. But tonight, I'd done what I needed to do. Honor my mother by telling her that justice had been served, that the man who tried to steal her legacy was paying the price, that everything she'd built was safe. The family lawyer had tried to disinherit me. He'd crafted an elaborate fraud, stolen millions, manipulated documents and witnesses. He'd used his position of trust to prey on my dying mother. And I'd exposed every illicit deal, uncovered every crime, and ensured he spent the rest of his life in prison. My mother had taught me to fight for what mattered. Richard Westfield learned, far too late, that her daughter had been paying attention. They thought she was powerless. They thought she'd never find out. They were wrong. Like if you believe betrayers should face consequences. Subscribe for more stories of justice and revenge. Comment your own story of family betrayal. Share to warn others about trusting the wrong people. Protect yourself. Protect your family. Start now.